Contrasting Viewpoints with Ray Sclafani and Mark Hurley.
Ray has been one of the leading consultants in the financial services industry for many years, and Mark has annoyed countless people throughout the wealth management industry over the last 25 years with the white papers he has written. Today, they are going to provide their insights into what is really going on in the industry, some of the more absurd things they've seen, and also for anyone in this industry, some issues they should be thinking about as they try to build their business.
Well, welcome back to the show. Hey, Mark Hurley, it is always good to be together with you.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Okay, so today is pretty special. We're going to do something a little bit different than we usually do. Today, we're going to dive deep into a topic that's really transforming financial advisors' future. And frankly, the future of all of our lives. We're going to dive into the topic of longevity. And Mark, I pulled some interesting statistics here. So consider this. In the U.S., a 65-year-old today has a 50% chance of living into their 90s. And we've said for decades, the boomers are coming, the boomers are coming, the boomers are coming. Well, by 2030, the entire boomer generation will finally be 65 or older, representing more than 73 million Americans. And here's what's fascinating. Half of the children born today will likely live beyond 100. So longevity is no longer a theoretical concept. It's truly transforming how we view wealth, retirement, and the purpose-driven years that lie ahead for so many Americans. And so the question is, are we as financial advising and as a financial advising community ready to guide clients not only into retirement, but also through what hope to be for many a vibrant extended life that will likely last 30 or maybe even 40 years, beyond that retirement date. And the question is whether advisors are prepared themselves and prepared to talk to clients about this incredible topic. So today we've invited this incredible executive chairman of Halbert Hargrove, Russ Hill, who is the head of this $3 billion wealth management firm based in Long Beach, and has for many years worked closely with the Stanford Longevity Center. And it's a pretty cool kind of combination. And Mark, I'm really grateful that you were able to get Halbert Hargrove and Russ on the line with us today. So this is pretty cool.
This is great. I'm really looking forward to it.
So one of the things most folks may not know, Russ is also a thought leader around this longevity topic by partnering closely with the Stanford Longevity Center, but more importantly, an author of a new book, which I think every advisor needs to be reading. It's called Optimizing Longevity, which is a road atlas for a happier, less predictable life. Russ, it's great to have you here with us today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ray. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and I want to add before we get started, look, I think book is a game changer because it hits on a topic that many clients are worried about, but really don't know how to think about it, much less what to do. Now, that said, as serious as this topic is, this book in many parts is, for lack of a better term, wickedly funny. Although you kind of have to pay attention because you don't realize when Russ is being sarcastic or he's actually being serious. But also, on a personal level, I found the book to be incredibly uplifting and enlightening, and it makes readers look forward to the future. And I think many advisors, after they've read the book, and I think if you're in this industry, you got to read the book. They also probably going to want to give it to a lot of their clients to read too.
Well, here's the other thing too, and Russ, I know we're going to get into this today. What really caught my attention as I was reading it was this, I think what you called rethinking or reframing financial planning. Like just in general, just the rethinking about financial planning in an industry where I think financial planning's become table stakes. Your redefinition and rethinking of financial planning is a level above. So I was pretty excited about that. Our talk today will focus around 4 key segments. The first is what Mark and I are calling this longevity mindset shift. The second is communication and discovery questions for deeper client conversations. The third will be practical planning implications for longer lives. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with equipping advisors to lead longevity conversations. So what do you guys say we get right into it?
Let's do it.
Go.
Okay, so I guess the good news is that we're all going to live a lot longer. And the bad news is we have to live with Mark Hurley a little bit longer. No, I'm just
You're so
totally
lucky.
kidding.
That
Clearly,
means
this
two or
spring.
three more white papers, Ray.
Yeah, that's right. More to come. Well, this brings clearly a lot of opportunities and challenges for financial advisors. But Russ, you make an interesting argument in your book that I think it's essential for everyone to plan financially. But at the same time, you tell readers that they should assume that this plan is going to change constantly. And thus, everyone's going to effectively have new plans multiple years in a row. So how do advisors even think about reframing financial planning for clients with life expectancies stretching 90 years and beyond?
That's a great question, Ray. And clearly, nobody has all the answers. But about 5.5 years ago, 6 years ago, what Stanford undertook was to figure out a way to build some context to really answer that very question that you're asking, which is what they call a new map of life. And that's what the book is based upon. But the idea is that when you're thinking about longevity, you really want to think about it for the whole life course. And you want to think about things that are not, some things that are financial, but many things that are non-financial. So what they came up with the new map of life was things like talking about early childhood education, about health and how you can live better that way, financial security, certainly, where you live, how you deal with intergenerational relationships. And all of these, and what I tried to do, which is shorten it up and make it so that people could read it a little more easily. It doesn't tell you how to think about those things, but it tells you some of the areas in which you really have to make decisions. Stanford as a longevity center is actually different than most places. Almost every university now has a geriatric or gerontology system. But their idea is that longer lives really stem from really early childhood development, through education and learning, through the way you work, through the way you save money. And what's become clear is that lives are no longer as linear as we might have thought before. You think about the old models, you were born, you went to school probably, you worked, you retired, you died. And now people have many, many jobs. They'll probably shift back and forth. They have to keep learning throughout life to keep up, because the half-life of what we learn when you get out of college is estimated at about 2.5 years. So that really doesn't go very far. And that means you're going to have all these off-ramps. We use the sort of the analogy in the book of a road atlas, but the idea of thinking, if you step back and look at an atlas before you take a trip, you sort of see all the off-ramps you could take, the cities along the way, where the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is, where, the Grand Canyon, if you're going past, you might decide you want to look that way. And so when you hit an off-ramp, being a job change, or somebody has poor health, or you want to do something different, you don't worry about it so much. You've made plans for that. And that's why we say you have to keep reframing this and re-looking at it, because it's not going to last very long.
Now, one of the more controversial things you say is that you're very, in some degree, very criticizing how financial planning is done, and you say it's understandable why, quote, many clients go solo, having read this, but you really aren't suggesting that clients shouldn't seek financial advice, because this sounds like it's much more complicated than most people can figure out on their own.
Well, I think actually one of the things that I say there, and I think this is true, when you hit an off-ramp, when you're making a decision, almost certainly there's an expert someplace that can help you, whether it's career changing or education or illness in your family or financial related things. And one of the questions that I think all financial advisors have to address within their businesses and their firms is, how much of that do you want to deal with internally, and how much of it do you deal with by building a network of experts to whom you can refer? Now, I think it's clear, and you see the demand for financial planning today increasing, that people know they need help. So it's a question of organizing that help. And from a business standpoint, do you do that, as I said, do you do that internally? Do you do it with external experts? And I think everybody's going to have a different balance, right, depending on what you're interested in. And we see that in the firms today. Some do life planning, some don't do it, some do more mechanical and more analytical things. So,
Russ, there was a recurring idea throughout the book that because of these additional years, whether it's 20, 25 years or more of potential life that most people will have, that things are going to be this unpredictable, more so in the future. And the idea that you work for X number of years, then retire, that game is obsolete. You just described that a moment ago. But you also talk about the notion that wealth is something that must be regularly and consistently replenished. What do you mean by that? And how do clients rethink this notion of retirement?
Well, that's because there are different sorts of wealth. And we talk about it a little bit in the book. But I mean, you can obviously think about it. Health is important, obviously. If you don't have health, then having money doesn't do much for you.
Doesn't matter. That's right. Sure.
If you're not, the largest source of wealth for most of us is human capital, right? It's working. And to continue working in today's environment where things are changing, and of course, COVID really brought this out, right? With work from home and all kinds of things, that accelerated a lot of changes. But the fact that you have to keep learning throughout life is actually replenishing your human capital, replenishing your wealth. So this is a continual process. And we've already seen the fastest growing cohort of employment today is older people. That's actually where the increase in employment has all come from older people. You have to maintain your health to do that. You have to keep working at it. And you have to maintain social relationships. And if you do that, your chances, as you pointed out before, your chances of being able to do this and having a good time and having fun doing it for another 20 or 30 years are really good. They're really very strong. So,
but you also spend a lot of time in the book, I think, talking about how it's important to insure against events that are either unlikely or unacceptable. And I don't think it's just as simple as buying an insurance policy or something. Maybe you could expand on how someone, if you're an advisor helping a client, should think about this issue.
Well, and I think most of us as advisors, need to have a sort of a philosophy behind how you view insurance in general. And I think you said it very well. I believe insurance is for unexpected, maybe tail risks that can really derail your whole program. Now, we use that in thinking about it. It kind of drives people crazy in our company that, for example, for employee benefits, they'd like to have dental insurance and vision insurance. And you've all heard this. Those are not really insurance. You're prepaying care. I mean, you're just trading dollars. What you want to have is as much coverage as you're able to get for calamities. A lot of clients, and I think a lot of people in the industry, actually think about insurance. They go, well, insurance is a zero-sum investment, so to speak, right? In other words, you expect the insurance company to make money when you pay them the premium. And you don't really want to collect on your house, right? I mean, nobody wants to collect on the insurance. But you have it because if you didn't have the insurance, it would be a serious problem from which you might not be able to recover. So what I believe is if you can get long-term care insurance, you do it at a reasonable cost. If you can have a large umbrella policy, you do it at a reasonable cost. You make sure that your home and car and everything are insured, but you don't try to maximize. In other words, you probably have large deductibles for most people because you want the top-end insurance. You don't want the rest of it. So I don't know if that answered the question that you were asking, Mark. But
yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you emphasized in your book is just how unpredictable life is. And so I imagine you're also suggesting that over time, this is going to change, that you're going to have to rethink what you're insured against.
Right.
Because, we don't know what's coming out of left field next, if you know what I mean.
Well, and we've just seen that in some of these, for example, home insurance today in California. If you were a planner 5 years ago, and somebody said, my home is paid for, so that's not really that's not a risk for future expenses really for me. And actually, California is probably not a good one because of Prop 13. But in a lot of states today, what they found is the increase in home taxes and the increase in home insurance costs are now greater than their mortgage was. Out of left field, right?
Yep.
If you looked at some of these people are getting $20,000 a year increases in their insurance premium.
Yeah, that's true in Florida for sure.
Yeah.
We see that a lot.
And so those things are going to happen in the future, whether it's, and I'm not trying to put down everything to climate change. That's whatever the reason for behind that. And you have to be flexible and think about and keep reserves because stuff's going to happen. The other thing that I put in there that I think a lot of financial planning programs, we like to put inputs in and then get a nice answer back that says, your chance of being successful is whatever it is, 82% or whatever it is. Well, you have to remember what that number really is. One, it's the wrong number of probability. What you want to know is the expected value of what happens if you fail. In other words, does that mean you have to start eating dog food, or does it mean you can't buy a new car every year, you have to do it every other year, or some silly thing like that? The other thing about the programs that you use is that the assumption is that you've done a good job on figuring out your spending. Well, I hate to break it to you. That's very, very difficult to do. It's difficult to even know what the government figures about the spending decline as you get older are. And for most of us, when we're looking at spending, we look at things like assets and liabilities, but the reality is, and we call them something different, we call them claims and resources. Your resources are not just your assets, they're things coming in, and Social Security is a huge part of that for most people. But on the claim side, let's say you were able to predict your own spending very accurately. But what happens if you have a family member for whom you're not legally responsible who becomes ill?
Yeah. How do you plan for that?
That's an additional expense.
Of course it is.
Right.
But it's not a liability, because liability means something that you're legally obligated to pay. So this is going to happen all the time, because not only are you going to live longer, probably, but so are your kids, and so are your grandkids, and maybe your own parents.
Russ, stay with this idea with your advisor hat on for just a moment. At one point in the book, you challenge a notion that's, I think, near and dear to most parents and grandparents, namely that their children should go to the best brand name college. And I think you even argue that it's important for clients to determine whether paying for college is an investment.
I'm sure Stanford sent you a love note over this, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, and this is interesting because do you generate a sufficient return for their children in terms of skills and ability to earn a living, or just capital, consumption? Like what's this emotional discussion for so many clients about the investment around college? And put your advisor hat on like
Sure.
You're talking to a client. I'm curious what your take is.
Well, and again, I'm turning here because I'm going to pick up the Los Angeles Times this morning, which addresses that very question, which I thought was interesting. I'm suggesting that as an advisor, you should have the discussion about the return on dollars put into higher education without making a value judgment for people, but I think they don't understand what really happens. The article in the LA Times today is called "The California State Universities Rank at the Top for Upward Mobility." And it's a fascinating study because to go to most of the Cal State campuses in California, it's relatively inexpensive. With scholarships and loans, maybe you can graduate for $20,000 or $30,000 of indebtedness if you couldn't pay for it, or you could work longer. That still gives a huge bump in income down the line. And in fact, if you wanted to take it to the extreme, what you would do is start with a community college and then go to a state school. And then later on, if you wanted to go to graduate school, you would do that. Because if you were to pick You can pick on Stanford, or I usually use Harvard because that way I can be more insulting.
Yeah, I prefer you do that too, but go
I'll
ahead.
use Harvard. If you go to Harvard and then graduate and go to Yale Law School, you can probably pay off your couple $100,000 in loans in a couple of years, right? You do have a very high income. That assumes you can get in, and it assumes you're picking that kind of employment. If, however, you wanted to go to Harvard and you borrowed the money and you want to become a librarian, it's very likely it's going to take you a very long time. Maybe never will you pay off those loans. Whereas if you went to a state school, you could do that. And what happens is if you go to the state school and do a good job, you can go on and get a graduate degree, and then you can, from a prestigious school, and say that's where you went. For example, in our firm, we have a lot of interns, and we've now hired a number of people from various state schools, and we've sent back 3 of them have gotten MBAs at USC, 1 at UC Irvine. We pay for that, for them to go back. And that's where they say they went to school now. If, I think what you're going to see, and you're already seeing it in the country, that middle range, particularly private universities, that may be locally prestigious, or maybe you went there and you want your kids to go there and that kind of thing, but they're middle ranked and they're not particularly distinguished. They're very expensive to go to. They're going out of business. We lose about 1 every week in this country. And the reason is it is a bad investment. It's not a bad investment to go to Harvard and then go to law school if you can get in. But for most of us, that's not what we're going to do. And so all I'm suggesting is that you look at it, and as an advisor, you explain to people how much it costs. And if you look at the difference in wealth between going to an Ivy League school and let's call it a state school or something else like that, even though you're in more income from the Ivy League school, it's not clear that you're wealthier after 10 or 20 years because you have the debt that you have to pay off. So,
hey, Russ, stick with the learning concept here for a moment. I'm curious about AI in the future, and you talk about intermittent learning, which for me is this lifetime learning value that's important to me. And how does that really optimize someone's ability to create wealth and mental health? And how have you seen that working?
Yeah, and more so than just getting an MBA, because I think you emphasized this is like a lifetime continuous process of sorts.
Well, even those who do get the MBA, Mark, they have to do through a lifetime as well. So you're absolutely right, though. I don't think we've yet seen all of the benefits we're going to see. But, AI, and we've all seen this kind of thing and read about it. But the thing that's so fascinating about it is very easy to have a personalized learning program for each individual person, right? We don't have all of that yet, but we can have that. So that as you go along, and let's say you wanted to change jobs or you're interested in developing a certain skill level, I think very shortly, and perhaps even now, and I just don't know where it is, you'll be able to take on a course that will be tailored for you and respond directly to you, and that'll be done because of AI. And so I think the ability to continue learning is going to be absolutely enormous and way beyond what it is now. I know that we're getting, like, from these language programs for foreign languages, now you're getting the equivalent of having a personal tutor. It responds to you.
I have that Duolingo on my phone, and I've been on a streak for over 300 days now doing Italian.
Yeah.
And I'm having a blast. But that's not expensive to do.
Right. And that's going to be specialized. And if you think about and read about, I don't know a lot of details, but I've been reading a bit about places like Amazon and other large employers. They're building out educational and training and learning things for their employees based on what they need, the skills they need within their business. So,
well, I'll tell you another. I just went on ChatGPT in preparation for this interview with you, and just looked up provide all the free programs available around the university related to entrepreneurship. And Stanford, Harvard, they all come up.
Oh, yeah.
MIT,
Yeah.
they've got free programs that you can take now that are available. So
And,
anybody that wants
interestingly, it doesn't really change, in my mind, it doesn't change their marketing. You know, for a major university, the most profitable thing they do is executive education. Can you do
In some
that better?
form.
Can you do that better with AI? Yes, you can. But it's not going to change their economics because what they're doing is selling you the certificate.
Hey, so let's get back to longevity real quick. I want to go maybe wealth beyond the dollar, so to speak.
Well, but before we do that, though, just one quick question, Russ, I wanted to put in here. This sounds like it's a conversation for clients of a certain age range. What ranges are you thinking about? Because like if someone's 70, I'm not sure, or 75, I'm not sure this is a conversation you'd have with them.
Well,
if someone's 30, I mean, how do you think about this?
I tend to think that you would have it at almost any age, in that it used to be if you were 75, people would look at you like, my God, you're still alive. That's wonderful. But today I know people that are saying they're starting businesses. And practically speaking, if you're in good health, they probably have a good 10 to 15 year runway to do something new, maybe something they've always wanted to do. So I think there's going to be learning opportunities at all ages. At younger times, you're probably going to be focused on whatever industry you're in or you'd like to be in, and developing, more skills and more learning in that area. But you might be reversing things when you get to be 75 and changing it. By the way, I don't think 75 is that old anymore.
Gee, I wonder why.
I used to look at it and go, my God, but now you go, okay, well, that's a nice.
It's the new 55, Russ. Don't
All
worry.
right. So can we get to longevity, back to longevity, Mark? Is that okay?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So since we're talking about longevity, and I want to make this really relevant, Russ, you're an incredible advisor with an incredible track record in history advising clients. How do advisors begin to shift the conversation with affluent clients from, do I have enough, or man, I know I have enough, to what kind of life do you want to live with this wealth over the next, 30 plus years? What is that conversation? How does one shift that and introduce that as a value proposition as part of their planning experience?
Right. I think you raised this earlier too in the idea of communication and understanding. I think first off, you have to know what the client's goals and objectives are, and depending on what sort of a firm you're working within, there are different ways to do that. What I recommended in the book is the way we use, and that's a scalable way to get at the heart of the goals that a client currently has. For a lifestyle or a smaller firm, you might do it directly. The essence of what we do is a structured, formalized way of asking questions and of doing triage. And the reason we do it that way, one, you tend to get very deeply, very quickly into, if there are two spouses, for example, what each of them wants to do, which may not be the same thing, which is always interesting. But also then it's a formalized way to get it into your data management system, so an entire team can deal with that client, as opposed to one person that's asked questions, and then that person has to actually do a really good job of putting it somewhere into a database, or they have to deal with the client. So,
what's an example of a typical open-end question you'd use to do this?
I'm not the person that does it, so I couldn't. I could make up a good question, but the true answer to your question is there's a skill set, and so we use specialized people within the firm who ask these questions and actually go down this. And by the way, interestingly enough, for most advisors, at least interesting to me, having been doing this many years, is we do not let the wealth advisor who brought the client in ask the questions. If you've been doing this a long time, I've been doing it for longer than 10 years now, and no comments more. But anyway, more than 50 years. If you are in a conversation with a client, it is very difficult to not jump in immediately with an answer to their question. Because you've heard this question before, right? And it's very easy to have this conversation. The hard part is to stay on track, to keep developing the depth behind the question. So they ask questions, they come back and they actually go back and then go down and get deeper and deeper. Then they come back and check with it and said, oh, is there anything more? And so our system was actually developed to ask cancer patients who can't hear what the doctor has to say. It's a way to ask questions so that, in fact, you can get at what they're really concerned about. Because they can't really answer this thing, and they can't focus on it. And I think a lot of people that deal with financial advisors are worried. And in fact, if you're doing this in person with them, they're taking visual cues from you, and they wonder, am I answering this question correctly to sound smart? And that's not what you want. You want to answer the question.
As part of this, you're trying to get them to also, I guess, address the purpose question too, right?
That the purpose questions come through with that. That's exactly right. And so that's the first part of it, which is to get out that information. The second part of it, and Ray, you raised this earlier about communication. We have in the appendix there what we call the personal funded ratio. There's other ways to do it, but I think the way that using a standardized program and coming up with a probability of success, or using spreadsheets and a lot of numbers, is actually, you have to do that work because you have to do that analytically. But I don't believe most clients are very comfortable looking at spreadsheets or looking at large number arrays. What our system uses in the personal funded ratio, and right now it's a little bit of an artisan kind of a deal. It's not as industrial strength as we'd like, is a way to look at what we call claims and resources. So, and then when you're at an off-ramp where you have a decision point or your plans change, you can look at it quickly to see where you are. Because your portfolio, as we said, is only part of your wealth. You have money coming in, or you will have if you have Social Security coming or pensions or other kind of payments. You have the money you have the equity in your home if you own a home. On the other side, you have claims, some of which are necessary for living expenses, some of which are legal liabilities. Others are things that you'd like to do someday. Others are possibilities for family members and things like that. So they have different priorities and different risks with them. Yeah, and if you can sit down with somebody and have a simple graphic that says, this is where you are and you're okay, because even though your portfolio is not everything you need, you have this other money coming in, or you're not spending that much. We like to characterize, for example, most of our clients as wealthy, primarily because they don't spend all the money they could spend. It isn't really, I mean, they tend to have money, but it's not like they have to have tens of millions of dollars because they don't spend more than they can afford to spend.
Russ, on that point, you bring up an interesting topic that I'd never heard before, something about longevity funds. I guess it was an interesting idea.
Yeah, tontines or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's this tontine approach of investing in a pool of assets?
Are you
with other
looking
people?
for overweight people who smoke and are alcoholics to jump in the pool with you?
That would be somewhat useful. That's true.
So yeah, what are these funds? This is new.
They used to be sort of one of the principal ways that people planned for, not really for longevity, but in a sense to not outlive their money. You can think of a tontine as it was actually named for Lorenzo di Tonti. So you take an Italian, it was in Italian, and it used to be used to finance the wars. In fact, England and France both had government tontines to fight each other. So they raised money. The idea is that you put money in a pool, and a whole bunch of people put money in a pool, and you start to pay out income based on the pool's earnings or a flat rate. And in essence, the last person standing gets whatever the last part of the money is. So you can think of it like an annuity without an insurance company. And this used to be very popular in the United States. And then some companies sort of defrauded people, so they became illegal for a while, although sort of semi-illegal. If you know the company TIA Craft.
Yeah, small little company.
A big company. One of their annuities is actually a tontine-based formula. But it's coming back now, and it's another way because you can say to people, okay, let's use, for example, age 100. We'll put this money in. We'll invest it very conservatively. You can do it in a ladder of treasury bonds or of tips if you're worried about inflation, which you should be. And it will pay an inflation-adjusted amount until you're age 100. And otherwise, basically, you can't get that. So I think there's going to be a whole lot of new products. That's one that's available now, but others will be developed, and probably based on the tontine, because when you use an annuity with an insurance company, one, you have credit risk of the company, and two, it's probably not inflation adjusted. And inflation adjustments put the risk on the company then, and that's back to the credit risk. Okay, so
yeah, and then they take massive fees, so it's also a whole other set of issues.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Now, it strikes me one of your arguments, key arguments here too, that an advisor's job is to help people rethink about getting older, and this is what I found really uplifting about the book is that they have to. We have a tendency in our society to have ageism, and you get to a certain age, you should go be quiet and do what you're doing. And you're one of the maybe not explicit arguments, but really powerful arguments I think you're making in the book. And you talk about the old Italian expression of throwing 60-year-olds from a bridge, kind of like the Eskimos putting the elderly on the ice floe and pushing them out to sea, that kind of thing, how outdated that is. And you emphasize that one of the key things that people have to realize is that wisdom endures. And I think about that book, I don't know if you remember P.J. O'Rourke's book, which says age and guile beat youth, innocence, and a bad haircut. And what I think what you're saying is a core responsibility as an advisor is to get people to rethink and be far more optimistic. Is that a fair description?
It really is. And I think, we're going to see, ageism is still rampant. Yeah, but what we're seeing is more and more studies that are showing that at work, for example, that work teams that are intergenerational are by far more effective than ones that are not. And that the wisdom of the older people on the team go well with the innovation and the energy and the technical savvy of the younger people on the team. But I always like to say, experience is something I don't have to do again.
That's great.
Mistakes.
Now, but you also said that there's stuff going on that this whole notion that we might live only maximum potentially 120, that might go out the window. And I'm a big fan of Stephen Wright, the comedian, who likes to say, I plan to live forever. So far, so good. My question is since you've been close to the Longevity Center at Stanford, is there anything that you've heard about that might be coming?
Yeah, give us some insight.
It's going to sound like cold water. By the way, to the comedian, I'd like to add Woody Allen, who said, if I knew where I was going to die, I wouldn't go there. There's not much evidence yet that we're going to be able to live much past 100 or 110. The oldest really confirmed person was Louise Valmont, who died at 122. However, I will say that she rode her bicycle till she was 115, and she smoked and drank. So,
a full life.
I got to tell you though, Russ, I keep listening to Doge-tracker.com. And it appears there are a lot of people living over 150 getting Social Security. So I don't know what you're talking about.
We got to find out what they're doing. That's awesome.
I can't really comment on that. But I will say that, and this has got to be confusing for a lot of people who people are fascinated by these medical advances, and they hear all this. And I take a lot of the services and I get this stuff in all the time about so and so just reinvented a new eyeball or whatever it is. And the reality so far is that there are a huge number of human trials going on, and there's an unbelievable amount of research because it can be funded now, doing all sorts of medical advances. And AI is helpful. There was the problem of folding proteins, and it turned out that AI could do it, and people have been trying to do it for decades and couldn't figure out the math. But most of those so far have been tested on mice, tested on single cell animals, et cetera, and they're encouraging, but they're not ready for prime time yet.
I just hope capitalism gets them there by the time I get to that age.
I think there's a pretty good chance that will be the case. But one of the things that anybody who gets involved in this has to be aware of, you have to really take this stuff with a grain of salt. Stanford, among other places, but they're starting up a newsletter. And actually, we're going to see the mock-ups of it in March. And one of the things that will happen is people like from the medical school and from the public health school and other places will look at some of these things so that you go, no, it doesn't actually work yet. And I will say that so far they say, well, we don't have any evidence of this going on much past, not the ones that say we're going to live to be 150 and things. There's a lot of people out there making these claims. My own view is that it's not impossible, but it certainly hasn't been demonstrated yet. And one of the things about supplements and things that you can read about is that since they haven't been tested in a peer-reviewed way, you don't know what the side effects are going to be. It's like
it may kill you.
I can cure your skin rash, but the side effect is early death. I mean, this is not really something that you want to have. And
all right, so let's get back on track. Let's talk about advisor confidence for just a quick sec, because I want to make this super duper relevant for the advisors and the audience listening. Many advisors feel confident discussing markets and portfolios, which seems to be in the wheelhouse, but so much more is changing about the way advisors having larger conversations with their clients about longevity. So what advice do you have for advisors who want to strengthen their ability to guide these kinds of discussions? Where do they begin, and what would you recommend?
Well, I can be a real smart aleck, and as Mark knows, that comes naturally to me. So buy my book.
There you go.
And actually, I would suggest everyone should do that, period.
Optimizing Longevity,
I appreciate
a road atlas for a happier, less predictable life.
Right.
By the way, there's a Kindle version and an Audible version, which is awesome, by the way.
Yeah.
And do you offer advisors who want to buy the stuff in bulk a discount?
I can't because Amazon doesn't work that way, and it's Amazon publishing. And by the way, I would suggest the Kindle book, and the reason is the paperback is much more expensive, and I opted in that originally because I really did this for us to provide to our clients, so that the production cost of this book is much higher than most paperbacks. The paper is well over twice as expensive as is normal in these books.
Plus, you can make the type larger with the Kindle.
So
you can make type much larger with the Kindle for people like you and me. That's important.
Absolutely right. So the Kindle is much less expensive. I do that. But kidding aside about that, one, there are a lot of university places and things like that to go. And I would suggest, of course, I'm biased. I like the Stanford website, but which is longevity.stanford.edu. Go on there and you'll get all sorts of ideas about how you deal with this. I think the most important thing for advisors to do is decide how much of this they want to get into personally and how much they want to build into their systems. As an example, if you have a client who has dementia and you have to deal with that, or in Mark's case, if you have a cybersecurity problem, you hire an outside expert, right? You don't become an expert in dementia or an expert in cybersecurity yourself. Some of the areas are soft. Some of the financial security ones you probably would learn internally about. How are you going to actually communicate with people? How should you ask them questions? How do you set up your business that way? So there's some of that in the book, and you can figure out places to go from there. There's also there's a bibliography in there of some of the ones I found important to read, and there's a lot of good stuff being done.
Yeah, and you actually put links to a lot of stuff in there so people can actually go deeper themselves in the book.
Yeah, and I'm going to put more. We have a website that's called optimizing-longevity.com. It doesn't have that much on it now, but it's going to have more and more as we add blogs to it. I think making that decision about how much you want to do internally, which is a matter of interest, is this interesting to you, is a decision you make early, and then you can figure out how to build that out. When we did the new map of life, we were early. But today, and Ray, you brought this out. This is actually now. I always like to say, if you're going to be surfing, you want to be on the front side of the wave, not the back side. And the wave is starting to crest, so it's time to get up on your board, so to speak.
Absolutely. And as I look ahead to the future of advice, it is very clear to me that there is an evolving role that advisors are going to play in this longevity revolution.
Absolutely.
And this is the evolution of wealth management. It's moving way beyond. I think George Kinder many, many years ago, in the
Right.
life planning, I think he was ahead of his time for sure.
Very much.
And this is now coming into, much clearer focus. So any other suggestions, advisors, as they think about?
I'll make another basically self-serving one. We have 3 events coming up, and one particularly for advisors. One, there's going to be an update, which is an invitation-only thing in March on the new map of life. So we'll get a lot of information out of that. In May, as Mark knows, I'm doing a session where we're going to get together and think about specifically just the questions you're asking, which is how would longevity affect an advisor's business and what's the best way to organize? And we're going to take the information from both of those sessions, and at the end of the year, either in the fall or the winter, Stanford has agreed to host this for financial advisors at Stanford, which is going to be, the purpose is going to be, how do you deal with clients?
That's
So you're trying to take what
security
is
and
the
how do you do
theoretical
about
and
longevity?
effectively
And I
convert
don't
it
have
into
all
the
those
practical
answers yet,
for the
but we
advisor.
will have a session come out of it. Exactly right. And to be practical, you have to take, as I say, how do you actually deal with the questions and who deals with it and how do you manage the information? And fortunately, technology can be very helpful there. It can be helpful in the sense that you can manage the information.
Mark,
flow
I have
and
one
who
other
does
silly
what to
question for
who,
Russ.
and,
Can I
what's
just
been
jump in on
placed
it
for,
before we? So,
as we know, but
Russ,
you
you
have
spent a
to
lot
be
of
set
time
up
with
to do
Stanford
that correctly.
and studying longevity. I always like the one actionable idea. What's the one personal habit that you've adopted that you believe will help you personally optimize your own longevity?
Other than going to Cortona frequently.
That was the main one. Uh, I, I'm trying to be more conscious of maintaining health. It gets harder as you get older, and I think that's you have to work at it. It's not as much fun as it used to be, and I think that would be the one thing I would say if I were going to pick one.
Hey, as we begin to wrap up, there are 3 really interesting statistics that I think bring this whole longevity into focus for financial advisors. The first is by 2034, which is around the corner, adults over 65 will now outnumber children under 18 for the first time in U.S. history. National Institute on Aging suggests that the number of centenarians, people aged 100 and above, is projected to grow eightfold by 2050. And the Stanford Center on Longevity denotes that 2025, 1 in 5 Americans will be over 65. So it's clear this is a topic that is only going to swell in the conversations advisors are having with their clients.
Absolutely right. And the only thing that I would add to that is that, which I've been alluding to before, is much of the advice that when we're talking about people about longevity, a lot of the advice you have is for people how you deal with very young children, for example, and the benefit of early childhood interaction with adults. Our client is very rarely a 3-year-old. Okay, the client is probably 45 or 50 or 60, but it's probably their children's children, their upcoming grandchildren. If you want some time when you can make a real difference in a future centenarian's life, it's when they're 2 years old, either by being there for them yourself or by financially helping your children to buy their time or childcare or whatever it is. You cannot replace that first 3 years. About 80% of the brain development happens then. And when you're talking to your clients, you really want to say, look, you have enough money to do this. This would be a time for you to help your kids help your grandkids. Don't save it all for later. You have enough. Particularly when you look at this personal funded ratio with all their other assets and their money coming in and what they're spending, et cetera. Many times that's the case. And that's the advice that can really change their family's life for generations.
Absolutely fantastic. Hey, Mark, any other questions for Russ before we begin to wrap up?
No, I just want to make sure everyone knows, though, that there's going to be an excerpt of Russ's book in the upcoming issue of Financial Advisor. And everyone should take a look at that, and you get a sense of some of the things that will be in the book. And I'm sure anyone who reads that is going to want to read the full book.
Absolutely. And Russ, listen, thanks so much for taking the time. This has been a fascinating conversation. And for everybody listening in, once again, check out Optimizing Longevity, a road atlas for a happier, less predictable life. Mark, always good to be with you. Russ, thanks again for joining us.